Hey guys, VaulSC here, how you going? Today I'm going to be talking about infiNity the game in general, and what we're going to be focusing on is the rules in the game that can potentially be fixed, corrected for the better, given that the new edition is coming out later this year, N4. So this is going to be another speculation video. I have done a video like this in the past, which was a very shallow look into it, but since then we've had more speculation. We've also had some material from Corvus Belli in which they were talking about some of the directions they're taking things in, so let's cover off on that as well. Before we get too far into that sort of discussion, I just want to straight up say what I would do if I was king for a day, if I was in control of everything infiNity related suddenly. I would pick a day in the near future, and I would come out on that day and I would say, here is a PDF which has my proposed fixes for all of the core rules, including Human Sphere. Secondly, here is a link to another version of Army 6, which is a beta version, which has a whole bunch of little changes to Fireteams and unit rules and profiles and stats. Most stuff would actually stay exactly the same, but the stuff that I consider a problem would be tweaked, points up and down here and there, abilities changed. If you don't want to use that, if you want to still use the old version, of course you can go off and do that while we're doing the beta test, but there would be the option to try out these new changes with your friends, since everything is agreed upon. And thirdly, I'd provide another PDF which has a new ITS season as a beta test with a whole bunch of missions changed, and the missions would bear in mind the changes I'd already put into the units and to the game. And then you guys could play it for 3 months, and we would look pretty closely and carefully at what stuff people found, people finding problems with the wording that could be easily fixed rather than set in stone and then hard to change later, or people finding that certain things are way overpowered or underpowered compared to what our expectations were, and just generally what people found that they liked, what allowed them to enjoy the game more, and what held the games up and caused an obstacle. And we would learn as much as we could from that before putting together a finalized version of the game. New rule books, new stats for models, new ITS, missions and season, and then you would launch the new edition. So that's how I would do it. I know that Corvus Belli won't do anything like that. The fixes and changes that I'm going to be talking about and proposing in this particular video, I have no expectation that people will listen to that and do it, or that any ideas will come from that. This video right now is intended to be an enjoyable, interesting, thoughtful discussion with you guys, the viewers, the audience for this channel, to provoke some conversation and just really see where we agree with what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. So I will be going through the rulebook, core rules, and the HSN3 rules. These are old PDFs downloaded way back in the day that haven't been errated, but the general idea is going to be there. And I've got myself a set of notes to remind me what I'm going to be talking about. So let's get a bit further into it. I will say that the thread that was posted recently by Gavin Bateman about criticals, I did have a read of that. I agree that critical hits don't need to be changed. And a lot of people think they do need to be changed. What I will say is that if you do change critical hits, so much of the game is based around them that there's going to be winners and losers and certain problems that come about as a result of doing that. My preference, I do agree that they cause a bit too much variance and a bit too much consternation for newer players and people that really rely on, well, not rely on, people that play a lot of high-level games at tournaments. It can be a bit off-putting. But what I would prefer to see is just a bit more around the rest of the game that allows you more mitigation, more risk management, rather than just changing the core mechanic. However, what that thread did do is it proposed some other changes, specifically the idea of having the critical hit still count as an automatic success. So if I crit on a 2 and you got a normal hit on a 5, I still win the face-to-face roll, but rather than that also doing a wound with no armor save automatically, it becomes a higher damage hit instead, like a damage 20, or other people have proposed the regular damage +3 or +6 or whatever it might be, meaning that if you were a big tag and cover, you still stand a decent chance of surviving. It's just that you haven't won the face-to-face roll. Some people really do like that, and I would like to point out that, or volunteer really, that I would be perfectly happy to play that kind of infiNity. If that actually was the rules change that they implement, I wouldn't be mad at that. I would still show up to my games and plan around that, and who knows whether it would be better or worse. I don't think it's necessary to do that, but I'd be all for it if everybody else is into that as well. So that's critical hits. Okay, so I'm going to take the time to just really scroll through the rulebook, and you know, one theme here that's going to keep coming up is that most of this stuff really is fine. You know, we have a game that has been very playable for many years, and that's most in part to the fact that this general core rule system is pretty good. There have been a whole bunch of other videos I've done on YouTube about the whole issue of intent versus play it as it lies, that kind of talk about, you know, when can you determine line of sight, you know, how can you just simply declare what you're trying to achieve, or do you have to put the model out there and potentially face the consequences? I don't want to have that kind of discussion in this video. Please have a look through my other videos in this channel if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions about that. In terms of the rules changing, the only considerations I think would be important are about when two players can determine line of sight between two models. And currently, as it stands, you can sort of only do that with models that are there in position in the board. What I would like to see is a bit more wording in this rulebook about whether it's possible to ask your opponent to verify line of sight to where a model could be, or an imaginary sort of position. Another thing about this is pre-measuring. I think that this is one of the last great bastions in the whole tabletop wargaming genre that does not have pre-measuring, and that's a good thing. I wouldn't want to be in a situation where we always know whether we're in range with our missile launcher or combi rifle with the right range bands. A couple of instances, though, where I think a little bit of pre-measuring is acceptable. One of them being with link teams. If you're moving your link leader, I think it should be allowed to pre-measure to other members of the link team, but not in any other direction, just while you're doing the order to make sure that they remain within coherency. I think you might even be able to do that. I'm not 100% sure. But the other thing is just with potential short skills. So if I've got a model and I'm moving out 4 inches, I think that you should be allowed to pre-measure to a particular location and then ask your opponent whether line of sight is possible between their models and that model, and they must answer honestly, and I think that should be baked into the rules. There should be a bit about that, because that's something that almost all of us are doing anyway, and it's a very clean, clear, concise way of playing the game that really just takes away the problems and allows us to focus on the stuff that's fun and interesting, and I'd like to see a bit more of that in the rules. So you should be able to say to your opponent, that model over there, would it have line of sight to a silhouette if we place it over here? And your opponent has to be truthful about that. I think that actually should be baked into the rules somewhere near the start of the rulebook. Or even in the, like, some sort of appendices sort of section, right? Okay, the other really big one that has been talked about time and time again, and, you know, I've done videos in this as well, is the whole zone of control shenanigans kind of thing. So at the moment, as we all know, if you move your trooper and it comes to within the zone of control of an enemy model, and that enemy model can't see your trooper, they're basically forced to take their arrows straight away, there and then. And if they choose not to do it, they lose it. And the only way for them to get an advantage in that situation is if they have the 6/10 rule. So you can move into zone of control without seeing them, force them to waste the arrow, and then come around the corner into close combat with them. Or you can have a MSV2 trooper with a smoke grenade nearby that moves into line of sight of the enemy model can't see you back, they waste the arrow, and then you shoot them. Which is a little bit of a problem in this game, and I've been spending a ton of time thinking about how to change that. And I've read some threads recently around that as well. I want to talk to you guys about my latest idea when it comes to that. And here's what I think could work. What if you allowed all models across the board to hold their arrow in a certain way if an enemy model comes within zone of control but not line of sight? So the difference between that and 6th Sense is that if an enemy model comes around the corner and can see you, you can't hold your arrow against them because you can see them. You've got to choose your dodge or your flamethrower or your pistol straight away, and then they can act. However, if they don't quite come around the corner, you can hold at that point and if they then come around the corner into close combat with you, you do get to fire your pistol or your flamethrower at them. So what I'm saying here is that everybody in the game gets a weak version of Sixth Sense. That's the first part of the idea that I have. The second part of that idea is to say that all models that have the stealth special rule get to override that. So that's the second level up. If you've got stealth, you can force your opponent to take an ARO if they're in zone of control and can't see you, or you can deny them that ARO. So if you don't want them to have a changed face, you can sneak up behind them, and stealth is still going to do that. The main difference here with the new stealth is that we're basically saying troopers with stealth that could previously just turn off their stealth to deny your ARO to force it, now are the only ones that can do that zone of control type shenanigans. So if you move into a smoke cloud with your Rushi or your Kodali, and they can't see you, they can hold their ARO, and then you can shoot them, and then you get flamethrowered. So you can't really abuse that close range tactic with either Kodali or the Rushi. And to be honest, those two models would still be perfectly fine, still be playable, still be very powerful. However, a Sien Warrior with multi-rifle and stealth because of martial arts doing the same thing would be able to do that very, very powerful tactic, which I think is okay, because if you're taking a Sien Warrior with a multi-rifle, it's very expensive, you've got to move it up into the middle of the table, get the smoke down, there's a lot more that goes into that. So you've still got something that can, in the game that can do that trick, but just not as egregiously and not as easily as Kodali dropping down next to a Speculative Killer, that kind of thing. Then you actually have Sixth Sense level 2 and Sixth Sense level 1, and the wording of those rules would be that they simply deny stealth. So you then have the next level up, which goes back to the whole stopping people from doing that. So even the Sien Warrior in that sort of situation wouldn't be able to stop the Sixth Sense level 2 model, and even the Ninja or Oniwaban wouldn't be able to stop that hold from happening. If they do actually have Sixth Sense, which is what you want. Sixth Sense models are supposed to be able to deny that kind of trick. So as far as I can see, that's fairly watertight. We'll talk a little bit later in this video about stealth and Sixth Sense in general. Most people that I've talked to really do feel that those are two of the most notorious rules in this game which need a lot of rewording, stealth and Sixth Sense. So we'll talk about them a bit more soon. Moving on though, let's go through to airborne deployment and dispersion. Dispersion, one thing about this is that it's always a fixed 16 inches, which I feel could be changed. I think you could randomize that with a D20, or even six-sided dice, 2d6, or just something based on the model's stats, perhaps. Just so it's not always going 16 every single time. I prefer the parameters to be such that the airborne trooper is likely to land a little bit closer. And also, if you land on a piece of terrain or exactly clipped into a wall, there should be more forgiving wording of the rules, allowing you to actually disperse and land somewhere. And I think this is important because airborne deploying in this way is such a risk when they disperse, because you land in front of troopers that can kill you, and this sort of deters a lot of people from having, your Diomedes and your Cuervo and more expensive drop troopers that potentially are just going to be completely lost if you just get a little bit unlucky. So I feel the dispersion part of that should be a little bit more forgiving. We also have troop type classifications. I could never really understand why the game needs all of the troop types, it's got a lot of them, and all of the troop classifications as well. There should be a way of just merging this a bit more and streamlining a bit more, so that, for example, heavy infantry are automatically elite troops, for example, or warbands are automatically, line troops or whatever it might be, garrison troops, I don't know, but for missions that and classified objectives that really force you to have a particular type, or rules like medium infantry, which gives you an extra 4-inch deployment, I feel like it just should be a bit more straight up rather than these large numbers of categories. There is a bit about army lists in the rulebook, and this is how you spend your points in infiNity and create a list. One thing I've always thought for a while is that there should be a few options that you can spend your points on that do not relate to actual models. Imagine if you could spend a few extra spare points to have an extra camo marker on the table, which is a decoy, or like a mine. So imagine if you had a list which was 5 SWCs, and you couldn't find any way to use that extra 1 point. You could spend an entire SWC and maybe like 3 regular points and have a mine on the battlefield. If you couldn't, spend it any other way. And that mine can be placed anywhere in your deployment zone. Sometimes you'd actually take that. Or imagine if you could spend some extra points to have a model start the game in a particular state, like impersonation, or even suppression fire, or even like marksmanship at level 2. That might be powerful, but if it was costed correctly, I think that would be cool, and it would give a bit more thought and tactics and strategy lended to the army list game, the metagame of it. Now, there's something about guts rolls, which I'm going to scroll down to. With guts rolls, generally it does work okay. The one thing I've never fully been comfortable with, I think I've just scrolled past that actually. Ballistical attacks, twin weapons, correct templates. It's just never been super clear to me about how you can move with guts checks in some cases. What I'd like to see with guts checks is just for it to be a bit clearer about going prone. I feel like you should be able to go prone, then take your 2-inch move, or take your 2-inch move, then go prone, either way. I feel like you should be able to use your ordinary movement abilities, like if you've got climbing plus or super jump or whatever, you should be able to use that during the guts check as well. And just a bit clearer about models being able to see you, like if the model that attacked you, if it did it with a spec fire grenade or something like that, or if it moved out to see you then moved away, what's the position that you use in terms of moving away from the attacker. I just feel like that could be clarified a bit more. I mean, you still get a pretty clear rules decision if you read into it very carefully, but some of these rules can just be worded in a bit of a better way so that players who are just starting out and new to the game, find that kind of thing very, very obvious. Just going to scroll through and see if I can find Impetuous. Here's the Impetuous order part, but I think special rules if we go right down to it, Impetuous after combat and everything. Impetuous, if you work hard enough and if you read carefully enough, Impetuous is always going to be, clear as to what you can do. It probably could be a bit better in terms of how to determine which model's the closest when they're really a long way away. One thing I find a bit awkward is that if you have an Impetuous model and there are 2 enemy models alongside it, a long way of the table, you actually have to then measure them. So it's like a bit of a pre-measuring, and that could be helpful to your army as to what actually happens there. So I don't love that. I also don't like the fact that if you are trying to get to an enemy model and the rules require you to walk up to a wall and then climb it and then walk over the ledge to the enemy model, that you kind of get stuck partway there. Like if I'm half an inch away from the wall, I've got to spend the entire Impetuous order just hitting the wall. I'll say a bit more about that in the climb rules, but I feel like you should be able to spend an entire long skill, and part of your movement can get you to the wall, and the rest of that movement can get you up the wall. So if I'm 2 inches away from a cliff, I declare a long skill climb, and I'm allowed to use half of that as a regular move and the other half as a partial 2-inch climb up the wall. I think that would be kind of cool. So that could also factor into Impetuous. I also think that the rules should allow you to prioritize climbing over jumping if it's going to cause damage. So if I'm very close to the wall and a climb is going to get me down, but a jump is going to get me closer to the enemy troopers, really, I mean, I can't imagine Models infiNity being so dumb that they would actually just kill themselves, especially if it's going to be an auto kill. You might even be able to make it so that extremely Impetuous models can't do any prioritization, so they're the ones who are really crazed. But if you've got regular Impetuous, then you do get the choice of actually stopping your model from jumping and dying. So you imagine a model like the Guangxi, which is extremely Impetuous. Well, that guy's going to just, balls to the wall, jump off a cliff. Whereas a Krakow Renegade, he wants to get out and he's not going to be very careful. He's the one who's taking a lot of risks, but he's not completely stupid. So something like that would make me feel better about the Impetuous rules in general. Okay, so on to special skills. This is common stuff here. I'll say a bit more about this later. I wanted to get to the special rules where I think, I don't know, I wanted to go back to activate actually. We're not at the special rules yet. Activate. Activate is sort of like a relic of older versions of infiNity where you're using activate for like doors and consoles and parts of scenery, and I think that this should just be removed. I think that scenery and consoles and missions should just have more specific and better rules for interactions. This is a good place to be talking about doors. There was a point in time a few years ago where we're all sort of upset about, doors because nobody could agree about how to work them. I feel like there should just be one universal way for doors to work, and my fix for that would be that doors are always closed unless you move a model to within 1 inch of that door, in which case it automatically opens. So I move within 1 inch of that door, it automatically opens, the line of sight is there, you can arrow with a shot through the door. As soon as I move more than 1 inch away from the door, it automatically closes again, so you've got the Star Trek doors up and down. If I'm within 1 inch of the door and you are as well, the doors are always open. But if only one of us is close enough to the door, it doesn't have to automatically open. We can voluntarily choose to keep it closed. So, if we really want to, just imagine it like there's a big button on either side of the door and, holding it down keeps it open. So as soon as you walk away from it, it closes. But as soon as you walk up to it, you're interacting with it and and it's not like a physical pressing my finger into the wall. It's something to do with your equipment, that keeps it open. So that would mean that doors don't discourage moving into buildings and don't slow the game down. There's nothing worse than having a beautifully designed building on one half of the table and neither player goes anywhere near it during that entire game because they lose too much. We've all experienced that in games of infiNity, and I've seen that time and time again where you've got a really good looking piece of terrain, and because it's going to be too clunky to move nearby it or through it, people just don't, and it's just absolutely wasted. So I wouldn't do that. Cautious movement's another one that could use a little bit of fixing. I'll just move this camera. So there was a ruling recently where if you're completely out in the open, you're just walking down a big road, and nobody can actually see you, but you declare a cautious move anyway, it prevents a hidden deployment model from coming out of hidden deployment. I think that is wrong. I think that if you start your movement within line of sight of the hidden deployment model or end within line of sight of the hidden deployment model, that model should be able to take its arrow. It shouldn't cause you to have an idle instead. You still allow your move, but they get to shoot you for free if that happens. So I don't like that. However, you can still cautious move past a gap and the hidden deployment model can't shoot you. So you treat them just a bit more like normal models. Otherwise, it seems okay. Tags, remotes, motorcycles, and vehicles can't do it. I think that's a little bit harsh for remotes. I'd like remotes to be able to do it a bit more often, just since, there's no reason why they couldn't, right? In my imagination, I think of some remotes being kind of clunky, but others being, fairly decent in terms of their stealthiness. So let's go back to climb. I was talking about climb earlier, and I really do feel it's just a clunky thing in this game that your movement is just so wasted as you are approaching a wall or leaving a wall. So if I'm trying to move towards a cliff face and the short skill takes me right up next to the wall but not touching it, I've got to spend an entire order just reaching it, even though it's like a few millimeters away. I really do hate that. So yeah, like I said before, I would change it so that you can still spend an entire order and you can move 4 inches in any direction. So you can climb across a horizontal surface, for example. That's fine. That's not going to change anything in the game. But you can split it. So you're going to do your climb partly across the surface and partly up the surface. I think that would be fine. Imagine that you have climbing plus, but you can only use one short skill. That's how it would work. And without the benefits of being able to shoot while you're climbing and stuff like that. You guys know what I mean. So I think that's important. I also think that once you reach the top, you're automatically placed beyond the actual surface. rather than 4 inches directly into the air and then having to use some of your move to get further along the surface. It's apparent that you can do something like that from the diagrams, but the wording I think could be a little bit better with that. We've got engage somewhere through here. You guys know how much I hate engage, but it could be easily fixed, and that's one of the reasons why we're talking about it in a video like this. First of all, we're going to clearly make it impossible for an enemy model to attack us in close combat without actually having us reach base to base, so we'd remove that part of it. Secondarily, if we succeed the engage, our model just moves directly towards the enemy model in the clearest, most direct, straightforward path possible and touches their base. They don't get to teleport us onto the other side and choose that location. So I've got my model, and you move past, and I'm a ninja, and I declare an engage. At whatever point you move past me, that's fine. I succeed, and then I just move directly towards your model, and if there's a wall on the way, I come around that wall. Easy as that. I also think that engage shouldn't just be an ARO, it could be a short skill. So if I have a ninja with kinematic level 2, and I spend my first short skill moving, and I come around a corner or out from behind a wall, and you flamethrower me, I could dodge as normal, but instead, if I want to, I could declare an aggressive engage, which is just a normal engage, it's just a short skill. If I fail, you flamethrower me, and if I pass, I can again use kinematic. I can move 4 inches, I can be placed towards your model, and I do it through the direct route, where I'm not teleported to the other side of you, I just simply get there. And this is a way of getting models into close combat more effectively without dying, but it's still not guaranteed, it's still a risk. And I don't think that would make ninjas and stuff more broken or anything like that. I think that would actually be fine in terms of game balance. I really do believe that. What's next on my list? So jump is another one. Jump is a bit of a weird one because it says that if you jump normally and you don't quite touch the ground, even 1 millimeter of distance is enough to cause us a strength 10 hit on you, which I think is a little bit much. Means that if you jump from a certain height, you've got to get directly to the ground. I think it's okay if you jump from like a small step and you go on a diagonal so you touch the ground, but the rule should probably be a bit more specific about how that works, right? So in this graphic number 1, I don't think you take any fall damage because you just touch the ground with it. But in graphic number 2, if you don't quite reach, am I looking at this right? Quite reach it, you take a strength 10. So maybe jumping should be a bit more granular. You should probably be let off the hook if you say can't come within 1 inch of the ground or 2 inches of the ground. As it stands, getting around parts of the table that don't have ladders and stuff like that can be too dangerous. And like I said before, what you want to achieve with your rules, what you want to do with your rules fixes, is to make the game more enjoyable, less clunky, more intuitive, and to give your terrain more playability, really. Creating rules and fixing rules and designing rules isn't a matter of finding rules that are showy and interesting and quirky and different from normal. They're about creating a good gaming experience. And you want to be able to create architecture in your terrain that looks really good and is very thought-provoking and captures your imagination. But like I said, you just don't want models to completely avoid parts of your terrain because that jump would just kill you. Or that climb is just going to take too long. You want to make a lot of this a lot more forgivable. Lean out, I reckon, is okay. Did I write anything about lean out? Let me just check. Before I forget, for jumping, climbing, and engage, and even for lean out, I think that you should very easily be able to remove or add prone status. Well, probably more remove. So if I'm behind a wall, I can remove it and then jump. If I'm behind, like at the bottom of a cliff, but behind a wall, I can remove prone status and climb. That should be really easy to do. Same with engage. I can remove engage status and start jumping after you. I'm springing up off the ground. Anything that makes that kind of thing more forgivable and it doesn't completely slow you down and deny you all these tactics just because of the logistics of it, that makes it a lot better. Speculative fire, I did want to point out, somebody said, I think in Discord recently, what about restricting it to a certain number of times a turn, like guided? Like imagine if you could only spec fire 5 times a turn. It would weaken stuff like the Squallow and the Lizard a bit more. But I think that's a good thing. You don't really want to have people just spend an entire turn doing a spec fire 10 times in a row, because that's not the kind of infiNity game most people want to play. You either have a really terrible time because the guy just rolled well and crushed you, or you win the game easily without much effort because they just failed too many spec shots. Spec fire really should just be more punishing troopers that are a bit too clumped up, and once that damage has been done, you know, moving on to another target isn't really worth it. And I think restricting it to, say, 5 is not a bad idea. We don't really need to make that change, because spec fire is generally okay as it is, but that might be a little bit of a tweak that is worth doing. Generally with special skills though, they are going to be making stuff a bit more streamlined, a little bit less nested. So as we come into special skills now, we'll see a lot of stuff where they are really just going to be, you know, taking 4 or 5 similar skills that sort of just interact with each other and moving them to 1 or 2 skills by the sounds of it, which is generally what people have been asking for. Let's go through a few of the things that I wanted to point out. Again, airborne deployment, a fun rule. It's a good rule for infiNity, helps the game. I just wish that dropping a trooper directly into enemy territory was a little bit less risky for your expensive drop troopers. It really does make me feel like leaving Kodali at home or leaving Diomedes at home, that kind of thing. But it's really a fun, cinematic, high-stakes kind of play to make. And I do feel that it should be a bit more forgiving. You've got superior airborne jump, which only the Hellcat and maybe something else has. It's a pretty rare ability, but allows you to deploy anywhere in your deployment zone. I feel like that should be more common. I feel like just scattering off the table and ending up on the side of the table is just a little bit too harsh. I would like to be able to deploy even like anywhere on your side of the table with forward deployment level 1. That way, Kodali scatters off the table, or Diomedes does, and you can bring them, you know, back in the game at a point where they can still fight. So that you're always going to get them into some decent sort of playable position, which is going to encourage you jumping a lot more. Because let's face it, if you know your opponent's going to pull that on you, you've got mines, crazy koalas, jammers, stuff in hidden deployment, and then there's your hacking and your hack transport. So all of that stuff is a good counter to people who are relying too heavily on the jump troopers. And people that take that risk are further punished with the deployment setback. So I think that could be more forgiving. Booty, I think, is one that I wanted to say something about. Make it optional, so if you do roll your motorcycle and you are on a rooftop, you shouldn't have to be able to equip it. So that should be baked into the rules somewhere. I think there should be some newer gear in here. We've had these tables for a very long time, and a lot of new guns have come out since then, so that could be kind of cool. I mean, where are your deployable repeaters and your nano screens and your nullifiers? Stuff like that could be really fun to have on a model that's going to be showing up. Like, imagine a Yuan with a nullifier. That could actually be pretty relevant sometimes. Nano screen on like a bounty hunter or something like that could be really fun. If you get an HMG and you're in a link team and you already have an HMG, I feel like you probably shouldn't have burst 6. They could probably just put that restriction in. I mean, that's almost never going to come up, and you're living the dream if it does come up, but you know, maybe say something about that, or even take the HMG out, put something else in there. Hidden deployment was something else I wanted to comment on. I mean, camouflage and hiding is just so integral to the game. It's just an iconic thing about an infiNity, and have a look at my video about Marcus State for more on this and my feelings, but generally the game is designed in such a way that this stuff is actually kind of balanced, and we wouldn't want to mess with it because this is actually a real triumph of infiNity. The better fixes are just to fix the units that are too powerful with it by changing their rules and their points costs. One thing I would like to see tidied up is hidden deployment, where it's not completely clear about what to do. If my cutter is behind the wall here, and you move in such a way that your model ends up in the position where my cutter actually is, and the cutter wants to reveal, the rules should actually have something to say about moving it with the least amount of displacement. There's already a bit of wording in the game already about, replacing a dog soldier with a larger silhouette. That general kind of thing would be very useful for that. I also feel like it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to write something in the wording of the rules about verifying the positioning of a hidden deployment trooper. I wouldn't mind if the game got a lot more formal, where there's a piece of paper where you write down your hidden deployment, fold that piece of paper up, put it next to the table, and your opponent can look at it after the game. So, rather than potentially taking a couple of different photographs and just, showing your opponent the one where you wanted your guy to be, I'm pretty sure nobody really does that, but I think some people would feel a bit more comfortable if it was just, my hack tower is behind the blue box and is not prone. And you write that down, and that's your way of verifying it. Might be kind of cool. Climbing plus. I had a couple of notes here. I don't like the idea that some people feel that climbing plus allows you to scale a surface, a vertical wall, let's say, that is actually shorter than your silhouette value. So let's say imagine a little tiny lip of a wall, and you walk up next to it, and you scale that, so you're just hanging out in the middle of nowhere purely to gain some extra height so you can shoot something. I don't really like that. I prefer that it says that climb can't be used on a vertical surface that doesn't actually have, a top horizontal surface, or isn't actually taller than your silhouette value. So this tiny little wall, you can't just climb up with it and sort of just have your feet sticking out the top of it. Don't love that. I also feel like it should be allowed to go on the other side. I had a game once where my opponent wanted to have his climbing plus model walk over the side of a bridge and then walk around to the bottom of it. It doesn't need to be in the game, but it's kind of cinematic and kind of fun, so a bit of words around that would be nice. And there's no reason not to have that in the game. It's not going to break the game, and it's actually something which I think a lot of people would enjoy. Doctor. I've always found it a little bit unusual that you can't use a doctor to heal a wound that a multi-wound model has taken if it's not in the unconscious state. Imagine doctor if you removed this wording that the target must be in an unconscious state. So if you replace that with the target must have lost a wound previously in the game, or something to that effect. You can tidy that up a bit more. So my model, my Swiss Guard with 2 wounds has gone down to 1 wound, and there's a trauma doc next to it. I'm allowed to use my trauma doc to try and heal that 1 wound back. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, normally with being wounded, that's usually what doctors do. If you've been killed, your doctor can't really do much about that. And when we talk about models dropping unconscious as a result of taking a gunshot wound, the willpower check is usually regarded as a matter of the doctor showing up on the scene, evaluating the damage, and us finding out whether the doctor actually can do anything about it. So in some cases, the model's been so badly damaged that the doctor can't do anything about it. The willpower check fails, and we remove the model. What that means is the doctor arrived on the scene, the Swiss Guard had been perforated with bullets and stands no chance of being revived, and that's why we remove the unconscious corpse from the table. Whereas if the doctor shows up in the nick of time, sees that, stopping the flow of blood or whatever is going to put him back in the fight, then the model comes out of unconscious state and gains a wound back. So that's how the mechanic's designed to work, but I feel like it should actually buff doctors by allowing you to go, okay, I'm going to doctor my Swiss Guard from 1 wound up to 2 wounds, and if I choose to do that, the Swiss Guard's not going to suffer an additional wound if I fail that in that kind of scenario. I would also balance that a bit by making that kind of doctoring attempt a -3, because you've got a patient that's, not flat on the operating table. He's actually sitting there trying to fight, and you're trying to patch him up. I think that willpower test should be at -3. But imagine that kind of situation. It would buff models with multi-wounds, and you can do it to NWI troopers already. So I feel like that would be good for game balance, because at the moment, I feel like multi-wound models kind of need a little bit of help relative to the 1 wound models, and stuff that has 1 wounds plus NWI. I think that'd be a good thing for the game. And we'll talk about engineer shortly, and I think a similar thing should apply to that. But before we go to engineer, Akbar Doctor, Honestly, I think there's only one thing in the game that actually has this. For streamlining, we could probably remove Akbar Doctor, or if you wanted, just make it automatically part of Doctor Plus, so that all of your Doctor Pluses in the game that are already there, your Ghulam Doctor Pluses, have Akbar Doctors as well. And I wouldn't mind that. Imagine Hakaslam and your lowly Ghulam Doctor Plus can revive your Alpha Seed back to 2 wounds. I don't mind it. Like, I think that 2 wound models could use that actual help. I think that would be fine. And then when we come to Engineer, I would equally say that if your tag has lost a wound, your Engineer can choose to repair it normally. So you fail the whip check and it takes a further wound. Or you can go for a different kind of repair where you're at whip -3, but if you fail, you don't lose that wound. So if you're at the end of your turn, your Dr. Worm's got nothing else left to do, and there's the Avatar there, and you want to try and revive him, you can do that. And I think that would be a buff to tags. And it wouldn't be a buff that makes them broken. It would just make them a little bit more useful and intuitive, and you'd take Engineers more often, and Engineers would be appropriately costed. I see nothing wrong with that kind of change and fix. I had something to say about Executive Order. People were lamenting like an FAQ or errata recently which said that if you come out of Hidden Deployment with your Hack Tower partway through your turn, you can't then spend the Lieutenant on the Hack Tower until next turn, because it hasn't generated the Lieutenant Order. We could tweak that easily, change the wording so that the new Lieutenant can spend that same Lieutenant Order. The Lieutenant Order is shared amongst any models in your army that happen to become the Lieutenant during that turn, but once it's spent, it's spent. I think that would be fair and fine. Fort Observer. I've always found that models with the Fort Observer special rule are almost always relying on their flash pulses and almost never trying to put things into targeted state in the games I've been playing over the last 5 years. Maybe it's different in your meta, but for mine, it's not great. I would actually change this to either be burst 3 or +3 to hit between 0 to 24. I wouldn't tweak it any more than that. You don't need to make it busted and overpowered. You just need to make it slightly more desirable for your Guilang or whatever it might be out there. Guilang, am I thinking of the right thing? Crocman, whatever it may be, SAS Trooper, Foxtrot, to actually get targeted happening a little bit more often. I feel like targeted is a really cool rule, and it should be a little bit easier to get it happening. So that would be a positive tweak. I had something to say about impersonation. If we scroll down here, I hate the fact that your Specular Killer can move and then move again, and 5 models can attempt to discover it, but apparently they can't drop it down a level. And then drop it down another level with the 2 successes. They have to wait till the next order and then spend that entire order discovering it. I would prefer that if you're moving your Speculo out and then moving it again and 5 things discover it and 3 things discover it successfully, you're going to drop down both impersonation levels and be completely revealed. At the moment, you can deploy right next to the deployment zone, get a free 8-inch move, then another free 8-inch move, and then you can move another 4 inches and then fire your boarding shotgun. And that is a bit much. Sorry if I've misunderstood that, by the way. You guys are welcome to correct me if I haven't, got that right. But I do feel it's a bit egregious for what impersonation allows. Total immunity is through here somewhere. Total immunity was kind of okay until it got really buffed like crazy. I think that you don't want to change it too much, but the first tweak that I would make is that if you're being shot at by something that just has ordinary normal ammunition to begin with, you can't use total immunity. So if you're a Karakuri and the enemy's just shooting you with a pistol, you can't use your BTS 6 to block that. You've got to go BTS 3. But sure, if they're firing their plasma gun at you or whatever, then you can have BTS 6 for all of the hits. I don't mind that. I think that's fine, but it's just a bit too egregious to have it automatically armor 6 all the time. I just find that's a little bit unfair. I feel like rather than saying, yep, immunity is just going to, avoid flash pulses and everything like that, rather than changing that element of it, I'd rather just see them add more vulnerabilities into the models that actually have this. So your Cameronian, your Sunsei, and your Karakuri, and your Chimera and Pupniks just give them more stuff that they're not immune to. Like some of those models should be, you know, vulnerable to flash pulses, and other ones should be vulnerable to AP or whatever it might be. I think that'd be fairer. Inspiring leadership I had something to say about as well. Only Joan and Wallace actually have it at the moment. So rather than fix this rule, just make it so that those factions don't have as many irregular troopers. Like, I'd tweak that a little bit. Caledonia is probably fine, but Pan-O, it was fine up until the point where they added Monstruckers and Helots, which Pan-O, to be honest, was going to take 100% of the time anyway. So it's just a bit stupid. It makes Joan of Arc a little bit too ubiquitous in those sort of basic Pan-O lists, in my view. Wasn't a big fan of that. Morats I've talked about a lot, and I think this is really a discussion for another video, but I feel like they just need one more rule. Veteran's great, love the fact that Morats are the veteran faction, and Religious is fun. It's a comical rule, and it makes you think, but Morats have often been thought of as this sort of aggressive, warlike race, and there's nothing about these two rules which tell me that. For the longest time, I've always thought that Morat should include a close combat rule as well. Either give them all Berserk, or give them all Natural Born Warrior, or some sort of reroll, or just a flat +3 across the board. And for the few Morats that impacts too much, maybe Kornak and Krakot Renegades, just go to those specific models and rework their profiles, and then you're fine. So all of your Vanguards and your Suryats and your Sogorats and your Raiko, they can actually have some sort of really cool buff in close combat, which makes Morats feel like a more radical and distinct faction, which is characterized by something. That'll be a huge plus. Multi-terrain, never really liked the fact that you've got to choose a terrain type. It'd just be a lot more simple if multi-terrain just ignored all of the movement penalties for everything. That'd make it slightly stronger, but not that much stronger. Wouldn't break the game, and it would just be a lot easier. I had something to say about censor. It's all the way down here. What was the censor comment? Really, with censor, it's more of an etiquette thing, where if I declare censor, I should always measure the 8 inches carefully with my opponent witnessing the roll, and my opponent just in the notes or in these examples, I think it should say that regardless of whether your opponent actually has any hidden deployment or how close it is, you always measure it carefully, get your opponent to look at it. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a tells game as to whether your opponent's responding to your censor physically with interest or not. Anyway, that's something for a different video, I think. Triangulated fire, I always felt it was a bit weird that the idea behind it and the thinking of it is that you're using technology to get a precise bullet shot trajectory to go directly into your opponent's hitbox, so to speak. So if they're defending up in the wall and there's a sniper and camouflage, the triangulated fire should use satellites and whatnot to hit that target. But the fact that it ignores the mods from close combat doesn't sit well with me. Some people do like the fact that that's a counter to tying things up in close combat. I still don't agree with that. I feel like the thinking behind triangulated fire is that it's supposed to hit a particular defensive target, whereas being in close combat means that you're jumping around a lot, you're constantly moving, and there's a chance of hitting your friend as you shoot. And just because you have triangulated fire, it shouldn't make it more likely that you'll hit your enemy rather than your friend there. In fact, this, I believe, makes it impossible to hit the friendly model, as far as I recall that working, so I wasn't that happy with that. Okay, Sixth Sense, one of the real big ones. So I'm not going to give you all of the conclusive fixes in this video. I do hope that Corvus Belli do a decent job of it. But let's just talk about a few of the objectives that we need here with Sixth Sense. We want to be careful about how Sixth Sense works against link teams and in sort of certain hacking situations. Generally, the wording of this needs to take into account so many different scenarios, so you've got to be very careful about how you word it. Holding your arrow and delaying your arrow has a bit of a distinction, and I'm not even 100% sure what the extent of that distinction is, but in the next edition of the game, we really do want to see what the difference is between holding your arrow as a trooper that has this rule compared to delaying it against a camo marker, for example, are different things. So maybe there's some room for streamlining there. There's also the wording about responding with a face-to-face roll against attacks directed at you by an enemy outside your line of fire, regardless of the facing. So that's a bit of an awkward one as well. If you're firing a shotgun and it's hitting through a friendly model, what this rule is supposed to be about is essentially giving you a 360 line of fire for that arrow only. So the rules could actually capture that a lot better. I don't really want to spend too much time in this video sort of talking about my fixes to this. It's really just a wish list for these particular rules, but we do feel that some changes need to be made. And I will sort of come back to that point I made earlier about how I think all models across the board should be able to hold their arrow within zone of control for an enemy model they can't see. That should be cancelable or forced closed by stealth. And then if you have Sixth Sense, you simply cancel stealth all the time if you want to, so that you go back to being able to hold against models within zone of control. Transmutation, I was going to say that when you're using your Fractar and you take like 3 wounds from the same hit, you have them all applied to the armor value on the first profile. And, there's enough, it's well worded enough that you can actually get what it means, but I feel like the wording could be improved so that even newer players understand intuitively and without any confusion that if you take 3 hits from one shot, you use the first troop profile and then you are transmuted after the order's completed. There's enough there in the wording to tell you that you need to do that, but I think that just needs to be highlighted a bit more, and examples can always be a bit clearer. Martial arts, once we get down to it, so I think Valor and that's okay, Veteran's okay. But once we come through, the close combat's generally quite balanced and well written in this game, but martial arts, I wanted to say something about martial arts level 2 and level 5. Level 2 doesn't come up enough and doesn't seem to be much better than level 1. So I feel like troopers that specifically have martial arts level 2 should also be able to combine it with level 1 in the way that, going from level 1 to level 2 means that you keep the -3 to your opponent. So those things should just keep successively getting better. Martial arts level 4 should almost always be better than level 3, so maybe some sort of buff to attacking or subtracting from your opponent along with the +1 to hit. And then martial arts level 5, which is almost never used, that should be just the absolute ultimate pinnacle of close combat mastery. So Shinobu and Miyamoto Musashi should just really have a big edge against MA3 plebs. So my proposal, although this is going to sound pretty extreme, I would actually say that martial arts level 5 should be a combination of 3 and 4. So not only are you +3, -3 to them, but you're burst 2. So if it's Shinobu versus a ninja, Shinobu's got a massive advantage because she's base stats with 2 dice, and the ninja's just base stats. The ninja can still get a jump on her with surprise attack one day, but it's a sword fight, and you've got a model that's clearly more skilled than the other, or Musashi versus somebody else with MA3, whatever it is, Joan of Arc or whatever it may be. Fencing and close combat fighting is the kind of thing where even a small difference in skill makes a big difference, and it really, snowballs in your favor. So I think that would be something I'd like to see, and I would include it. I mean, some people might sort of balk at that and be shocked at that it becomes too powerful. I think it's fine, given it's for 2 specific models that are very expensive and are very specialized. Stealth. And look, we've already been talking about stealth. Again, just make it a bit more of a specific use kind of thing. Stealth is a rule that allows you to force your opponent to use their arrow or prevent them from using their arrow when they're in zone of control and they can't see you. It should also be a skill that is always on by default and always forces them to use their arrows, and you must declare that you're switching it up to actively deny their arrow when you're coming close to them to sneak up on them. So your ninja wants to walk around the back of a building and walk towards an enemy model with its back turned and move into close combat with it to attack it without being hit by a flamethrower. You do that by moving and declaring that you are denying arrows. If you're a tag and you happen to have stealth because you're in like an OUI and you're walking across the battlefield, you're automatically denying arrows from hidden deployment models that you're coming near to. You must... sorry, no, I got the running all the way. So your OUI is moving across the battlefield. It's always on to force the arrows. So if you forget to declare that you're going to deny arrows, that's going to impact on a model that has a hidden deployment assault hacker. Similarly with camouflage stuff, like you've got your Swiss Guard moving across the battlefield, it's always forcing arrows to appear if they want to appear. So I move my Swiss Guard within 4 inches of where your hidden deployment Malignos assault hacker is, and if you want to bring them out, you have to declare the delay at that point in time, or whatever it might be. And if I then shoot at an enemy model in the distance, then you can hack me. But I can always just stop it right there and stop you from having that opportunity. So that's how stealth should work. You choose whether to force or deny the arrow, and it's always on to always be forcing that arrow to be used. You've got to declare when you're denying the enemy's arrow. And once you word it like that, it should be intuitive enough that it doesn't cause too many problems. I think we're into weaponry and equipment. One of my most no-brainer, easy to implement changes here is with armor-piercing ammunition. The only thing you need to do is to round armor down and have it go down to 0. And this seems so obvious to me because if you have an armor-piercing heavy machine gun and you're saying that has no effect on a Fusilier with armor 1, but it does have the effect on a big Jotun to half its armor but still give it 5 armor, it doesn't quite make sense to me. AP is one of the weakest, most useless ammo types in the game, but if you make this change, it suddenly becomes relevant. It would then go to working against everything with armor, rather than like half of the stuff in the game that has armor, and it would be a lot more fearsome against stuff that's high armor, and that would be one of the things you start to think about a bit more when you're trying to deal with big armor, tanky stuff. Bear in mind, in this edition of infiNity, we'd be wanting to bring in a lot of changes that help tags. We're hopefully making hacking a bit different, jammers a little bit less effective, ECM, which I'll talk about shortly, more effective, engineering them a bit easier to do. So I feel like armor piercing, designed to be one of the things that cracks heavy armor, that should have a bit more teeth. That should be a bit more powerful. Speaking of stuff that is meant to crack heavy armor, we come down to K1 ammunition, which is okay. I don't really mind K1, but the K1 sniper rifle, oh my god. The K1 sniper rifle needs to do 2 armor saves. So there should be K1 and K1 level 2, for example, or just call it K1 and K2. K2 causes 2 armor saves at damage 12, and K2 ammunition, so K1 does 1 save, K2 does 2 saves. I also think that monofilament mines should also do 2 saves, and we'll come to that later. But monofilament, man, monofilament mines are such an investment. They cost you SWCs, and to get a mine on the table, you've got to tell your opponent that your model actually had that in their profile. In fact, that's a change I'd like to make to infiNity as well, is to say that with open information, there's a lot of stuff that is no longer going to be there. Like, if your model has the mine layer ability or has mines on its profile, that part of its profile will now be closed information. So if you've got a guy like a shrouded hanging out in the middle of nowhere and you reveal him and he's just got a boarding shotgun or a combi rifle or whatever, and there's a camo marker nearby, you don't have to tell your opponent that you had the mine layer ability and you have 2 mines left. That will be closed. So that will make monofilament mines more powerful, but the other thing would be to make them cause 2 saves or you die. That would be really quite threatening. And I don't think it would be game-breaking either. Speaking of mines, when we're talking about anti-personnel mines, one thing that really needs to be fixed, and I can't believe this has persisted through infiNity through this entire time, and that is that mines should be prone by default. So the camo marker has the prone marker next to it, even though it's not a trooper. That way you can't distinguish it from a friendly model that usually wants to be prone and the actual mine. And it also removes this really stupid effect of being able to discover a mine marker because it's sticking up over a wall, then once it's discovered, its silhouette value actually drops to like a silhouette 0, which is where it should have been in the first place. So that one change would be a massive quality of life change and good fix for that kind of mechanic. I did want to say something about deactivator and ECM. Is that in this section? I think this is just ammo types. I think we need to go down to equipment. So this is close combat weapons, flamethrowers, grenades. Most of the weapons are actually okay. We'll talk about a couple more weapons in HSN 3. But the good thing about weapons is that they're largely balanced because every faction has access to the pool of guns, which is why generally they're okay. It's only sort of internal balance where you get, you know, some profiles a lot more desirable than others, mostly with submachine guns being the culprit, right? So equipment, let's come down to it. Deactivator. I don't know if you're allowed to use deactivators against markers, but if you can't, you should be able to, because deactivators almost never get used. ECM, I've had it in my mind to change this for the longest time, because people don't use guided very much at all, and this, you know, effect of cancelling or getting the +6 mod is just, it's pretty lame. Imagine if ECM was a one-use ability like a Symbiomate, but it provided total immunity only against projectile weapons. So it specifies them: missile launchers, heavy rocket launchers, DEPs, Panzerfausts, just those kinds of things, and you only get to use it once. And only the Guija and the Jotun and stuff like that have it. So if they are just being caught out by a missile launcher like a Noctifer, they're okay. But if they're trying to have, you know, multiple face-to-face rolls with a missile launcher and a link team, they're not going to be able to use it that entire time. So I think that would be a big buff to the tags that have it. But again, you'd engineer that. You'd actually have different points costs for those tags. But it would make ECM way more interesting. And stuff that has one-use only effects aren't thoughtless. You're putting some effort and some tactics into that, and some decision and some skill into when to use them. I always thought that was actually a good effect. We come down to multispectral visor. I've mentioned this in a previous video, but MSV3 is the only one that needs help here, and MSV3 ought to go back to the old school, being able to shoot at camo markers directly. That would be amazing. Only 3 things in the game have this. You got Asuras, Quilagard, and Gerontid. All 3 of them need help. They need to be better, and turning those models into powerhouses that people, you know, take more often than not is a good thing, because those are cool models that are faction defining and actually really representative of good things in this game, and they should be powerful. So, you know, it does hurt, you know, camouflage spam a bit more, but camouflage spam, to be honest, is going to be good regardless. I really like the idea of these being able to just reveal an enemy marker just by shooting at it. I think that would be cool. And if it turns out to be too powerful, well, you just simply make those models a little bit more expensive or weaken them in other ways. So just about there, coming towards the end part of the game, a lot of these special rules are fine. Retreat, remove retreat completely. I've done a video about that already. I don't want to go back into it again. I'm absolutely confident that my argument against that is correct. Retreat just shouldn't be there. If you're worried that that will make players just too focused on killing and being aggressive, then I think that's wrong. We already have missions in the game like countermeasures and power pack and missions like that, which really just force you to be about the mission and really heartily coming up with tactics that are there for attacking and being aggressive and stomping them. How we doing? Command tokens. I would like to be able to use a command token in the reactive turn for making a model automatically pass a guts check, because that's where guts checks are actually important. Hacking in general, we know that this is going to be simplified, and Corvus Belli have said that they're going to actually streamline this a lot. As I've said in the previous video, defensive hacking devices need to be changed so that they're more about supportware, they're more about protecting a model with innate edges rather than themselves. Offline mode is a big one I've mentioned before. Offline mode would be a really cool rule where, just like going into prone state or cancelling prone state, at the start of any movement short skill, you can switch off your hacking device or turn it on. We can start the game with your gear turned off. So your assault hacking locust out in the middle of the table can start in offline mode and can't be killed by Kernel and his pitches and kill a hacker. Just can't be done. So you can actually plan in advance for using your hacker that might be vulnerable in a reactive turn. It would also make the transmission matrix mission make a whole lot more sense, being able to turn your hackers on or off, and you can have a hacker on the table that's not hackable but still allowing you to choose to include remotes in your list. It would just solve so many problems. There's some states over here which are fine. The engaged state in particular, where do I find it? I feel like engaged should be automatically cancelled with no choice about the matter when you're the only model in combat that's not null. So you kill the enemy model, you can't use them as a meat shield anymore, your opponent just is able to shoot at you without the penalty from then on. That should have been there from the dawn of time, but I can't believe that's been in the game all that time. Alrighty, so over an hour of talking, let's go to HSN 3. We'll just whip through a few changes on this one. This is going to be a controversial hot take here, but I think that link teams should allow models to choose different skills as they're moving around. I think you should be able to move them all 4 inches, look for AROs, and then your link leader shoots, and then the other members move. Imagine the covering fire, like cinematics, right? I move my HMG around to see your sniper declares a shot back at me, and then the other group of people who stayed out of line of sight use their 4 inches to jump across the hallway. What's wrong with that? You've still got to stay within coherency. It does make link teams more powerful for sure, but I think that's fine. I don't think they should be able to do actions like the other 4 guys place mines while I'm doing that. The spearhead should still be the one that's actually doing the shooting and acting, but for short skills it should be alright. I also think you should be able to move next to a wall, and then with your next order, one of your troopers in the link team moves down the wall with a climb or a jump, and the other team can still move, and you still get part of the team climbing. It just makes the link teams so much less clunky. This is a buff to link teams, which are already quite strong, but I would also go to Army 6 and I'd weaken some of the more egregious link teams, especially OSS and Deshat and stuff like that, and take out some of the wild cards and just make link teams are just a bit weaker in the sectorials overall to balance that. But in terms of their abilities to maneuver, I'd make them a lot more, a lot less clunkier. I'd even go as far as saying that you can reform a link team for free without even spending a command token if you're spending an order on the guy you want to become the link leader and everybody else is already in position and nobody's isolated. That would make some very, very powerful tactics possible with bouncing the Fireteam core between two control groups. That would be very powerful. I don't think it would be game breaking. I think it would allow for some new strategies and tactics that weren't really there before. And you could always, put a curb on that and weaken that by, again, going to the sectorials and making some of the more egregious, dangerous link teams cost more or have more restriction as to what they can have, right? So you go to Caledonia, and if you're allowing that, you might just say that once William Wallace has joined one type of link team, he can't join a different one, for example. Or, you got 8 Unidrons in one list and another 8 Unidrons in the next group, and there could be some restriction to what happens there. I also think that Fireteam duos should be useful and relevant other than just moving your guys around. Imagine that with your Fireteam duo, you would have the option of just moving normally as the rules imply you can already, or you can do a special movement where you count as doing a coordinated order just for those 2 models by spending 1 regular order and no command token. So you've moved your geckos around the map, and then you get into a situation where you want to gang up on somebody, so they both move around the corner, and the enemy has to do an ARO and pick one of them to ARO against, and you get to fire with half burst with the link leader, and 1 shot with the other guy who might be able to chain colt or something like that, or combi rifle, or blitzen. So I think that would make duos a lot more dangerous, and I don't think that dangerous is enough in the current rules. I think that would be a decent change. But yeah, we would have to balance that a bit by looking at the really powerful fire teams as they are and making those a little bit weaker, which we kind of need to do anyway. Going through some of the rules, special rules, if I come down to the one I wanted to talk about, I wanted to mention with Prothion in particular. Prothion is a little bit weird about what happens once you get up to 4 wounds or 3 wounds, and then you lose some wounds and then you start to gain some wounds again. I've never really been comfortable with that. I think it should be a bit more explicit about what happens. I feel like it should say that as soon as you go above 1 wound, you gain shock immunity, and the number of wounds you have on your profile is changed by eating people, and as you take wounds later, basically you're just counted as being wounded. If you get doctored, you can go up to 4 wounds or whatever it is again that way. That's kind of how it is, but it needs to be spelt out a bit more clearly in the actual profile. Also, the whole thing about taking damage and eating people up in the same order, and that being a way of avoiding shock, that needs to be written into the actual wording a bit more clearly. Equipment, I've always wondered why they haven't added white noise grenades, by the way. Equipment's down here somewhere. I think there should be a type of grenade which actually just puts down a white noise template. So there's the Prothion rules right there. But yeah, having a really exotic trooper being able to throw down like this white noise template that you can only other sort of get with the white noise hacking device, I don't see why that couldn't be a thing, or a white noise grenade launcher. Especially if multispectral visor level 3 has become too powerful with the change that we were going to make to it. There were chest mines. Chest mines, I don't like the idea that I can attack you with my Krakot Renegade, expend my chest mine as a close combat attack, and still detonate the other one that I have left if you kill me because I've made a normal roll. So this should be nerfed a little bit. I mean, I like chest mines. I think they're really cool. It's just Krakot Renegades that are too powerful. And everything else that has chest mines, like the Blackjack or whatever, it's not too big a deal. It would also be fun if chest mines could be obtained with booty level 1 or 2. But with chest mines, yeah, I don't think you should be able to attack with it and detonate it once you go unconscious at the same time. D-charges, I feel like if you're already next to the thing you want to blow up, you should be able to spend a long skill just blowing it up. As it stands, I think you have to short skill place it and then new order short skill detonate it, which I've never liked. So I think that needs to be less clunky. Electric Pulse, I had a game recently where I was playing up against 2 electric pulses. I feel like if you're in close combat with 2 flash pulse bots and they both electric pulse you and you can only attack one of them, it should just give them a cumulative +3. So you've got to beat a 10 rather than a 7, rather than them automatically immobilizing you. I think that's a bit much. There should be a bit of a play against that. Otherwise, the rule is fine. Maybe clear it up with mods. It doesn't allow you to add any mods to the CC or Phys attributes when performing this from the special skills or equipment, for example. So chest mines won't work, MA3 won't work. But if you're already CC 23, you're already getting +3 from that ability. By the way, attributes above 20 should be a bit clearer in the rules. I forgot to say that anything above 20 is adding that amount to your dice roll. New players won't see that very easily with the current wording. That should be a bit better. But beating flash pulses, I'm not really sure if you should be allowed to use a modification to your burst from MA4. And I'm not sure if you should be allowed to use a modification from your base stats. You should just be going in there with CC 20 and hoping that you beat a 7. It does weaken CC troops a bit, the specialists, but we're already adding other things in the game that are going to do that, that to debuff them, as we've already seen. Red Furies, I would weaken the range band beyond 24 a lot. It seems to be like a close range blitzing sort of, aggressive kind of gun. It shouldn't be a sniper. So Red Furies, I would make it -6 beyond 24 and impossible to shoot beyond 40. That's how I would change Red Furies. I'd be really heavy-handed with it. SMGs, we've talked so much about all the different ways to change them. I mean, we changed the AP or shock types, we changed the range bands, changed the points cost. It's the points cost which is most egregious, so that's probably the best fix. Although I'd also be happy with just changing the range from 8 to 16 going to -3, 16 to 24 going to -6, and impossible to hit beyond 24. I'd be perfectly happy with that as well. Baggage, I think it just needs to be written into the rules that it switches off when the model dies. That was argued about a long time ago and wasn't very clear to new players. Biolocator for Guangxi, I would make it so that once you use it, you cannot be doctored. Otherwise, experimental drugs too easy to achieve. The Hungry's control device, I would make it so that it's not mandatory to have one in Morats for you to be able to take Hungry's. So you can just take Gakis and that without it. But it would still be mandatory to have them as a link team. I would also say that you should be able to reform the link team after breaking it, which you can't currently do. So that would buff Morats a little bit to be able to include that, in my view. Ejection system, just better dispersion like we talked about with jump troops. Holo projector should be way more forgiving with Holo 1. So you should be able to use it to impersonate a different kind of silhouette value. I know it sounds crazy, but you could pretend to be, you know, your massive Magari Bagard and then come back to be a normal guy. I would allow that. I know it's really weird, but I would let people do that, or maybe put some restriction, like you can be like up to an S5 or something. Oh yeah, but you shouldn't just be stuck trying to pretend that you're a bike or a pangolin if you are actually a Luduan, right? You should also not have to declare that you are restraining it if you're impetuous. You could just pretend that, oh, I'm impetuous, but I'm not actually going to use it. You should be allowed to do that. That shouldn't give it away. You should be able to temporarily be an irregular rather than a regular if you want to. So that will help you disguise your Holo 1. I think that'll be really, really cool. Holo 2 needs to be buffed, and I've thought very hard about how to buff it, and I can't really come up with anything conclusive. But imagine if you were allowed to, instead of writing down which one's the real one, just have it played such that it's always the last one to be revealed. Or if you're revealing them voluntarily, you can just pick one and reveal that one. So your real model is always in three places at once. And it's never the one that gets shot. So you move out with Holo 2, and you're in line of sight of their sniper. They decide to ARO by shooting one of the Holos. You keep moving, that Holo dies. You did that without any risk. That is the kind of change that would cause me to really consider taking Luduans and your Sepulchre Knight and your Ayar, and I don't think it would make them too broken. It would just make them powerful, and they're already costed to have something like that. I think that kind of change is worth a go. I had something to say about Minesweeper. I feel like this should be able to be declared against camouflage markers that you know are a mine. And if it's not a mine, your opponent can simply say, you know, it didn't work. Or actually, you place a like a mine-swept token next to the camo marker. And if you move up to it and find that it wasn't a mine, then it had no effect. But if it was a mine, it doesn't go off. So you won't actually know whether you took over their mine until it's revealed later, which I think would be a really fun bit of mind games. Symbiont armor, I would go back to the old Symbiont armor, which is a fire sensitive, where if you take the fire hit, you don't get to morph into the next version of the armor. But if you start with 2 wounds, it doesn't really affect you. I think that would weaken Tohar in general, but they need to be weakened. I think the Symbiont armor is too powerful. Symbiomates, they did nerf Symbiomates, but not quite enough. I got told that if you flash pulse a guy with a Symbiomate and they don't have to take their check because they're immune to it because of total immunity, the Symbiomate doesn't even go away. That part needs to be fixed. And then that's about it for the core rules. There's so much more to say about the actual units. I might do another video actually about you know, what changes I'd make to the actual profiles. Not that anybody's going to actually run with it, but the only other thing I'll say is that a lot of the changes that need to be made are in the missions. You know, people talk quite a lot about willpower checks with consoles and stuff like that, and how areas work and pre-measuring and points are scored. That might be a whole nother video as well, is about how to design better missions for this game. But I wanted to take the hour and 20 minutes in this video just to go over some of the really easy stuff to tweak. Most of the stuff that I've talked about in these 2 PDFs, just so easy to change. I've been begging out for changes like how armor piercing works and how engage works and how the engage state works and how some of the guns work. God, I just hope they run with some of the stuff in the next edition, because if we get to the next edition and none of this stuff has changed and they make some of the rules worse, that's going to be really demoralizing. Whew, okay, had a good talk. Hope you guys got something out of this video. Let me know what you think. We'll be having some more bat reps in the very near future.